Please be seated. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see y'all. As we have been progressing through this series of sorts on restoring our connections, we've been really kind of moving in one of two columns, right? So there's the column, we might say, or the category of things that we want to have restored in our lives, like faith, right? We wanted to reconnect with our faith. But then also we've had a category about the environments in which those things have been restored, or where we might seek to see them restored. And so we talked about Sabbath, for instance, as an environment in which we can reconnect with the relationships that are most important. And we talked about community as the place in which, the environment in which we are restored to the great cloud of witnesses and the practice of faith. When we were talking about community, the reason I bring that back up is that we named something that's really important, and that is that isolation, a sort of antithesis of community, is the enemy of human flourishing. It was like a little asterisk on the end of a sentence at the beginning, so as we come back to it, we'll say more about that today. Isolation is the enemy of human flourishing. Added to that today, we might say that isolation erodes the ability of individuals and of communities to discern and cultivate and pursue their essential purpose. Now, there are a lot of sermons that I'm not going to preach today, but I might point to them from time to time. One might say that human flourishing, that flourishing for all of creation, that is the purpose of creation, and isolation being the enemy of that flourishing, well, hey, look, it erodes our sense of being able to pursue our purpose. But there's a lot more than just that. That's a scriptural and theological take on it. There are secular takes on it as well that can help us. Over the last maybe 2 decades, there have been a lot of different studies that have pointed in this direction. Over the last 10 or 15 years, they've gotten a little bit more serious, and now they're getting popular. So here come the books and all that kind of stuff. Researchers have begun to understand more and more about the link between isolation and purpose, or the lack thereof, and further, and especially this, that purpose for individuals and for communities was strongly correlated to better outcomes. Your life satisfaction, if you have a sense of purpose in your life, will be greater than someone without it. Your literal life expectancy is correlated, an increase in life expectancy with those who have an abiding sense or resilient sense of purpose. And here's the real good news for some of us. Turns out those with a strong sense of purpose are even perceived to be more attractive to other people. Not a bad side benefit. I'm not preaching that you should feel or look more attractive to other people. I'm just saying it's not bad when we can get that as a little icing on the cake, right? What seems to be the case, what all these studies kind of point to, is that for individuals, and again, for communities as well, but we'll come back to that, purpose ends up providing the means by which we organize our lives, our activity, our history, the stories and narratives that we tell ourselves, and our future. Purpose is what sort of aims all of that and brings it into alignment. It organizes our life around meaning itself, and it provides the means by which we organize the events of our lives into a meaningful narrative. And that meaningful narrative changes our perspective about the events that are happening in our lives, even the events that we don't love. That's another one of those sermons for another day. One of the studies that I was reviewing as I was doing some research on this, the study had participants climb a very steep hill. So all the participants were going to be putting forth effort. The grade of the hill was not going to change between participants, but the activity, the condition, the environmental condition that began the experiment for the different participants was different. Some of them would just entertain themselves, watch a movie, and then go climb that hill. Sounds like a terrible lab experiment, right? The other ones would journal about purpose in their lives and then go climb the same hill. And then at the top of the hill, they would be asked questions, and there were other groups too, but they would be asked questions about their perception about the hill that they climbed. Those who were reflective about purpose in their lives perceived a hill that was not as steep as the others did, and would perceive that they put forth less effort than the others. The events in our lives, even the hard ones, as they get brought up into our narrative understanding of purpose, well, it changes how we perceive them. Purpose isn't the same as having a goal. It's not the same as your job. It's not intermediate. It is long-term, though it does from time to time shift in our lives. And I wonder if you know what your purpose is. Not your job, not your New Year's resolutions, not your goals for this year, but that which provides meaning and draws you to pursue that meaning. Do you know what yours is? For a lot of us, because it shifts over time and our circumstances might change, maybe you're having one of those moments of crisis in your understanding of your purpose, but each one of us has a purpose. Every single one of us has a purpose. Here's the other trick about it. Purpose tends to lead us beyond ourselves, almost by definition, so that when we have a sense of purpose, the why behind our activity and the why behind our story begins to allow us to participate in something bigger than ourselves. It's probably at least partially for this reason that our connections with one another, being in community, are so critical to shaping our sense of purpose. Because it's really hard when we're alone to feel like we're participating in something bigger. It's really hard when we're isolated, I should say. Sometimes being alone is the place where you do that discernment work on your purpose. But when you're isolated, that's different than just being alone. It's hard to participate in something bigger when you feel isolated. It takes conversation and listening and even observation for us to cultivate and define what our sense of purpose is. So here's some shorthand stuff for you, just as a reminder. Purpose is good for you. Yeah, you heard me say that, I hope. Purpose is good for you. Connections with other people, not isolation, but connections with other people will help you discern and cultivate your sense of purpose. And what's true for you as an individual is also true for us as a community. And that may be more important, at least from the perspective of Jesus. Jesus, in his teachings and in his stories and in his healings and all these events that occur in his life, his major focus is on communities. He has a great concern for communities. In the course of his purpose, his mission, his work to reconcile the whole created order to itself and then back to God, he's going to be dealing with communities most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time when Jesus is talking about salvation, he's talking about groups, not about individuals. And he's talking about now, not about eternity. Again, not every time, but most of the time. Sometimes it gets hidden behind the language of our story. A lot of times what Jesus does is he recognizes that somebody has been cast out or isolated or separated, and he provides healing for that person, let's say. But he also provides restoration to the group so that the one who is being healed can be incorporated back into the whole, and the healing ends up going both ways. The healing itself is often, or the wellness itself in the Greek, it's the word for salvation. He is concerned with our community well-being, and he's concerned with taking those who, because of disease or stigma, or just because communities sometimes can do harmful things, taking those who have been excluded and bringing them in. Today, we have another one of those encounters where it turns out some people don't like the work that Jesus has been doing to find the isolated people and bring them in, and so they're confronting him about it. It kind of started off with, if you remember, Jesus having dinner with some Pharisees and leaders in a town. And he He's just a total pill at this dinner party, and he's confronting them about all of their stuff before anybody even sits down. And then they start to sit down. Remember, they're like jostling for position. And Jesus pulls the host maybe aside, maybe just publicly, and says, you shouldn't have even invited all these rich people to dinner anyway. You should have invited the poor and the vulnerable and the marginalized and the isolated and the separated. People who have nothing to pay you back with. You should have brought them to dinner. Strong sense is that they weren't listening, and so Jesus decided he would go out and do that on his own. So Jesus has gone out and he's collected tax collectors and sinners and brought them to dinner. Now, you know who sinners are because you are them, right? Me too. I'm not isolating you. We know intimately, most of us anyway, who sinners are. If you think that you don't, I would invite you to reconsider. You might just know one. It could be you. I'll let you say it's me, though, just so that you can be let off the hook for today. I'm a sinner. Here I am. All right, so we know who the sinners are. Tax collectors, you may need some additional help on to know why this was so scandalous. This work of Jesus to bring people back in. Total scandal. The tax collectors were hired by the Roman Empire to collect the taxes that the empire was levying against the people of Judea, Palestine, the Levant, the area, and really everywhere else in the empire as well. And yes, sometimes you would receive a benefit like a Roman road or an aqueduct. They did pretty well with those things. That's good engineering and construction. Public works. But other times, it was just kind of the burden of being an occupied territory. So the Romans found people who were susceptible to corruption, we might say, and hired them to be the tax collectors. And here's what they would do to pay themselves. Not only would they be the enemy and side with the enemy in the work, but they tended to also extort people for additional money to pay themselves on the side, because who's going to go fight the Roman Empire because your neighbor is levying a higher tax than what you thought was appropriate on paper? So these folks are the enemy. Their job title might have said tax collector, but most people would have thought of them as like vile, villainous, evil henchmen for the occupying forces of the empire. Nobody liked the tax collectors. Sinners and tax collectors. They're bad enough that they get to be in a whole separate category from everybody else. Jesus has dinner with them, and the Pharisees can't stand it like a lot of other things. They just hate it. Ew, gross. Not even ew, gross, but also, how dare you? Who do you think you are inviting these people to dinner? But Jesus has a strong sense of purpose. All that Jesus will do will take those who are cut off from community and bring them in. He's willing to die for it. And so off he goes, inviting these folks to dinner. He defines his purpose with these teachings, the parable about a sheep and a lost coin. I'm perfectly willing to leave the 99 behind to go after the one. And he doesn't condemn them. He doesn't say, actually, all you sheep are kind of lost too, but I'm going to go after this one lost sheep. He doesn't do that. You're fine. You're not sick. I'm a physician. I'm going to go find the sick people. Just says you're okay, but my mission is to find the one lost sheep, and so off I go. My mission is to find this coin, and so I'm going to light this lamp, and I'm going to go. He wants the lost thing to be found, and he hopes that the group, when he comes back home, the group will be ready to celebrate the finding of the lost thing. Little spoiler for you, that's not, as it turns out, how it works. That group is not ready to celebrate. We'll talk about that more in the future. Don't you long for that clarity of purpose that would allow you to confront a group like that and say, I don't care what you think about me. I know what my job is. I'm going to do it. I want that for our church. Now, in some sense, the purpose of church has always been the same. We wordsmith from time to time because it's important for us to hold on to the language that provides clarity about what we are to do. And we're working on that right now. we want to get that language just right, but we know what it is to do and to be church. I hope you know what that is. One of the phrases that is sticking with a number of us who've been thinking about this for a little while now about St. David's is that St. David's has been called to shine a brighter light. I like that language. To shine a brighter light is to make Christ and his love more visible. Christ is shining a light. He is the light that has entered the world. Sometimes it can be hard to see. And so we remove barriers and we increase visibility, right? By our actions, by how we organize ourselves. It's part of our purpose. But to shine a brighter light, too, is to answer Jesus' call to us to shine our light before others. That was right at the beginning of his teaching. Hopefully some of you will remember it. He says, shine your light before others, that your good works might glorify your Father in heaven. He also says stuff like, don't hide your light under a bushel basket, whatever that is. What is a bushel basket? I'm still confused about that, no matter how many times I sing this little light of mine. Don't hide it. Let it shine before others. To shine a brighter light also means to increase our capacity to search for those who have been separated or isolated. As Jesus in this parable would be the one lighting a candle to search in the house for the one coin that is lost, or to go out to a dark and stormy night to find a sheep that has found itself in a ravine. We get to add our light as Jesus searches, to add our candles, to light them as well, so that we can find that which has been lost, that which has been isolated or separated, to bring it back in and bring it home and to celebrate with the angels in heaven as the community is restored. For our mutual well-being and human flourishing, this is our sense of purpose. I want to see us shine a brighter light in the year ahead. To shine our light more brightly, to increase the visibility of Christ's light in this community, to shine our light, to help search, will require some new activities. Yes, we'll talk more about those. It also will require strengthening activities that we're already doing and really good at, but strengthening probably by reconnecting with their purpose, with the why behind the doing of the activity itself. How does that help us to shine this light? I want to encourage you to think about that as an individual first. How does your ministry, not just in church, but in your life and in your work, in your family, how does your ministry shine the light of Christ? And how can you shine that light more brightly? But I want you to think about it as it relates to St. David's also. What does it mean for us to shine that light more brightly in this community and in the world? So I ponder that for today. I can't help but think that Jesus would perhaps ask us a question that looks something like this. As we add the power of our light to his own, searching for these lost coins and sheep, what will we find? What do you think you will find? Who has been isolated? Who has been separated? Who has been lost? It's Jesus' mission and purpose to find them, to heal them, to bring them home. It's Jesus' purpose to heal us, to make us whole, to bring us all well-being. Who's missing? Who has been separated or isolated or lost? It's my prayer that we will mutually discern the answer to questions like that. That we'll have a strong sense of our purpose. And then, two, that we'll have all the courage and all the grace we need to answer that call in our lives, to organize our activity, our ministry, our story, and all that we do to work alongside Jesus as he seeks, finds, and heals those who are isolated or separated or lost. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.
Turning to page 5.